Have you ever stopped to wonder about this? What if a country does literally everything right, but still struggles to grow?
Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're peeling back the layers on global development to look at a silent, almost invisible force that holds entire nations back. We're talking about the environmental constraint trap.
Just think about the absolute ideal scenario for a second. A nation improves its institutions, heavily invests in education, and carefully manages its economy. So, on paper, they're doing everything perfectly. And yet, their progress just stalls. And here's the crazy part. It doesn't stall because of bad policy or human error or even corruption. It stalls simply because of where that country happens to sit on the map.
Okay, let's dive into this. And it all really starts with one simple idea, one that forms the very physical foundation of our survival.
You see, not all land is created equal. Some countries are just blessed with fertile soil and reliable rain, but others, they face relentless droughts and incredibly unpredictable weather. And this physical disparity matters so much more than we usually admit. Because before industry, before advanced technology, and long before high finance, there is food. If a nation's agriculture is inherently unstable, then literally everything built on top of it becomes incredibly fragile.
All right, so now let's add geography to the mix. Coastal countries, they can trade cheaply and scale their industries pretty seamlessly. But landlocked countries, well, every single export has to cross foreign borders, and every import becomes drastically more expensive.
It's a massive geographic penalty. Economic growth slows down in these landlocked regions. And again, it's not because of bad decisions. It's simply because of the sheer physical burden of distance and borders.
Okay, so now layer in climate. This is where the physical environment goes from being a passive boundary to a very active, escalating threat.
We're talking rising temperatures, unpredictable rainfall, you name it. Extreme weather hits harder now. Droughts completely wipe out crops, floods wash away vital infrastructure, and intense heat drastically reduces human productivity. It creates this vicious, exhausting loop. Imagine a country spends years building up its infrastructure and economy. Then, bam, a sudden climate shock hits. The damage is done, and now the country has to drain its resources just to rebuild what it already had. A climate shock doesn't just hurt once, it completely resets progress. So this is not just stagnation, it's regression. It's a brutal, relentless cycle that actively shoves nations backward despite their absolute best efforts to move forward. Right, now let's think about energy. Because if a country actually wants to escape relying entirely on agriculture, industrial growth absolutely demands reliable and affordable power. But look at the double bind here. On one hand, they might lack natural fossil fuel reserves. On the other hand, they lack the wealth to scale up renewable energy infrastructure. The result? Production costs stay sky high, and industrialization just grinds to a halt. So let's connect this to everything we've seen so far. Think about how these physical layers, food, geography, climate, and energy, how they all interact directly with human systems. Take the poverty trap. It becomes significantly worse when a country's foundational agriculture is inherently unstable, right? Or what about the debt trap? That gets heavily compounded when natural disasters continually force a country into expensive emergency borrowing just to rebuild what was lost. And then there's global dependency and fragility. Both of these are way more likely when basic resources like food and energy are scarce, forcing a nation to rely on importing them just to survive. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that environmental constraints do not act alone. They are the silent amplifiers of every single economic and systemic trap a nation can face. And this brings us to the ultimate, deeply uncomfortable truth of it all. At the end of the day, you just cannot change geography. Human agency can do a lot, for sure. You can absolutely reform policies, you can fight corruption, you can even restructure national debt. But you cannot control the rainfall. You cannot eliminate natural constraints. Even the absolute best systemic decisions by a government cannot alter physical reality. At best, a country adapts. It invests in irrigation, in heavy, resilient infrastructure, in diversifying its economy. But adaptation is incredibly expensive. And the cruelest part of this whole trap is that the countries facing the hardest physical constraints almost always have the fewest resources to respond with. Which leaves us right here, looking at not just separate problems, but one massive interconnected system. In a world shaped by such harsh physical limits, where even the very best decisions aren't always enough, how can countries truly escape this interconnected trap? That is something we all need to deeply reflect on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around us.